I'm Sarina Fazan. Taking a risk, making a difference, and changing the course of your life. Remarkable stories from people defying the odds. You're listening to Trailblazer. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here on Trailblazer, where you hear from amazing people and their remarkable stories. Sitting across from me right now is one of my most favorite people, Judge Nick Nazaretian. Judge, thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Judge, okay, I have to ask you first. Well, first of all, for the viewers, tell us a little bit about you. You're a judge in Hillsborough County.
I'm a circuit court judge in Hillsborough County. I've been a judge for about 20 years. I initially started with family law, but my background's kind of in the criminal law area, so I do criminal courts right now. I've been doing those for about, 13 years after the family law.
Wow. Okay, so Judge, let me ask you. You have one of those professions that honestly, it's like a wow factor, right? So what is it like being a criminal judge?
Well, it's a business that never stops. You take calls not only while you're working in the courthouse, but when you get off of work and the work day ends, there's phone calls for police for search warrants. There's issues you have to deal on the computer now with different cases. So it's basically a 24-hour job. It's not a job that you work 9 to 5 and stop. A lot of times you go home and you work on your cases, making decisions, reviewing documents, reviewing case law. So it's one of those things that's not a 9 to 5 deal. You're a judge 24 hours a day throughout your whole term.
So let me ask you, like so many of us, some of our favorite shows are law and order based shows. In fact, one of the most popular shows ever on television is Law and Order, and then, all the series after that. You see on those shows that police detectives do knock on a judge's door, and you just talked about it, you're working 24 hours a day. So does that happen?
It does happen. We're on duty once a year, which is literally all week, 24 hours a day, where people will come to your house in the middle of the night. So oftentimes there's patrol cars outside my house at 2 a.m, and everyone always is asking the next morning, well, did something happen over in the Nazaretian house? What's going on? So, because they see the police officers, because they'll come get their warrant signed, and then they'll go serve them right away. So they don't do those in broad daylight. A lot of times they do them at nighttime to be more effective. So they'll come at 1, I'm in my garage signing it, they're on the street going to do it right after that. So it's just funny. The neighbors oftentimes will see the police out there and they'll think, well, what's going on? And I have to explain to them everything's fine. So it does happen a lot.
Wow, Judge, I can only imagine the pressure, though, of here's a police detective or, a deputy presenting you with a warrant and saying, Judge, we need you to sign this because of X, Y, and Z. I know you're the consummate professional, but how do you make those decisions? Is this experience?
Well, one of the things that's super important, because every once in a while in our system something bad happens, a decision is made, and then there's a bad result that happens, and we can't predict what's going to happen. You just have to look at each case with the facts and circumstances around it and make best decision with your experience, with your knowledge that you've obtained at the job. And I was a prosecutor for 10 years before that, and before that I was a 3-year public defender. So I've been in the criminal system for a long time. And while there's still things new that come up, I've seen pretty much most of it that comes up. So that really helps to kind of look back on your experience and just your ability to deal with these situations. And it's just, you have to be very careful. We can't predict the future. So on occasion, you will hear about some tragedy that happens, and sometimes they'll blame a judge for lowering a bail or doing this or doing that. And nobody wants that to happen at all. That's obviously, nobody wants that to happen, but you make the best decision you can, and then you move on to the next decision.
Wow, Judge, so let me ask you, do you feel to be a judge, it is very important to have, you said you worked 3 years in the public defender's office and you were a prosecutor for 10 years. That type of background, you need that type of background,
It gives
right?
you a balance. It gives you a balance. You know what it's like to represent somebody, to have the government prosecute your client. You're familiar with what a client goes through and the due process rights the accused have. Then on the flip side, as a prosecutor, you deal with the victim and the victim's rights, so you know what it's like to build a case. Oftentimes a defense lawyer is trying to break down a case or destroy a case. That's a little harsh, but break down a case where the prosecutor is building it up. So having done both of those, it really gives you a good balance when you pull back and become a judge of both of those two people that you used to be. So it really is helpful, because you know what a good public defender is or a good defense lawyer, you know what a good prosecutor is. You just use that experience. So it really has been a balancing situation that I've pulled back now and become a judge, and it's really helpful to see both sides of that.
I want to go back to that in a minute, but I
I want to ask you a question, and I know this is kind of like a scary question, or maybe that's not even the right word, but going back to a lot of television shows that people watch, and you do see that judges getting threatened with their lives. Does that happen as well, Judge?
That's happened a few times, and oftentimes it's a relative of somebody, and thankfully most times it's just a bunch of people talking. They're upset because of what happened to their relative. But it is a concern, and I think all of us at one point, especially in the family law area and the criminal area, have had to get some extra security for a while. And a lot of times it's people that just are talking, but you never know when that's going to happen. There have been some in our state. There's been some issues where judges have been attacked. Not recently, but within a few years ago, and it's just something you have to be careful of, because the real important thing when you're in court is to not make it personal. The one thing I've noticed about being a public defender, prosecutor, and judge now, the accused and maybe their families, as long as they think you're doing your job, you're being fair, doing your job, there's really not a lot of bad feelings towards the judge. Oftentimes, and I find this surprising, that when I would think they'd be upset with the prosecutor or the judge. Oftentimes, they're upset with their own lawyer.
Wow.
Because of what happened. So I didn't really realize that when I was a young defense lawyer, public defender, but a lot of times that's who they're upset. But the key is not to make it personal. Just do your job. You don't need to make personal comments about an individual. There's a way to do your job without making it personal towards that person. And as long as I think people think you're doing your job, I think they understand. They're not going to be happy with you, and they'll say things, but I don't think they're going to do anything beyond that.
And you know that you could go home at night and sleep well because you're making the right decision, because justice always prevails.
But there have been a couple times that's a very good point you made, but when you've gone home and you're still thinking about something and you're having trouble sleeping, you're thinking about it for a couple of days. That's happened a couple of times, and I've actually gone back and changed my mind because it just bothers you. It concerns you. It's just something that just doesn't feel right or sound right in your head, and you're trying to figure it out. And and if that happens, it's happened 2 or 3 times in my 33 years of experience.
Wow, that you actually go back.
You go back and maybe make a different decision or change your mind about something. And because sometimes that happens, or look at it maybe additional time. It's going to happen once in a while. So normally that does not happen, but if it's still something you're thinking about days and days later, you might want to go back and take a look at it. But it does happen. Because remember, judges are human beings. They have good days and bad days. And it's important to understand that maybe you weren't thinking about one particular issue clearly enough, and you went back and rethought through it. That does happen.
So when you say, and I know it's only happened a few times with changing your mind, are you talking about like a verdict that came in,
it wouldn't even be a verdict because the jury would do that.
The jury decides the
verdict. But like, let's say if you had a motion to suppress evidence and you said, well, it was an okay search, and you allowed the police search to go through. I'm giving you a hypothetical. You allowed the police search to go through. And you thought later on, well, you know what? Maybe maybe the police should not have done that. Okay, and it's weighing in your head, and you'll maybe reevaluate it. So,
wow.
But that does happen. It doesn't happen a lot. Because see, the good thing about this job is when you hear a case, while everyone wants you to make a decision right away, you can say, I'm going to take this under advisement and wait a day or two. And so that's why it doesn't happen a lot, going back and changing, because if you really aren't sure, or you have some doubts, take it under advisement for a couple of days, rethink it. When you're home, relaxed in a different setting, go through it in your head, and just that sorts of things. And that's usually, if that's why it doesn't happen a lot, because normally if you're not sure when you actually hear it, you can just take it under advisement.
So, Judge, I have many, many questions, but speaking of your job, how do you get your job in the first place?
There are 2 ways to become a judge in the state of Florida. There's the appointment process. So imagine a job comes open, in any job, and there's interviews. Well, there's something called the JNC, Judicial Nominating Commission, and that commission is set up with about, I think, 9 or 10 people on it. Some are appointed by the governor, some by the bar, and it's people that are interested in vetting judges and kind of interviewing judges here locally. So anyone can apply that's got 5 years of experience as a lawyer, Hillsborough County resident, right? And they apply for a job opening. Maybe a judge has retired, maybe unfortunately passed away, or maybe they've moved up to a higher judge, like a hierarchy, they moved to, and that position becomes open. Or, like in Hillsborough right now, hopefully we're going to get some new judge spots coming in from the legislature, potentially. So those are some of the ways the openings come up. So they'll announce an opening, and you'll put your application in. The application is very thorough, talks all about your legal history. You can give recommendation letters, much like any other job. And this local committee, the local JNC, and of course every county has one of those. The JNCs, every circuit has one of those, and they will look at your applications and they'll grant you a local interview. Okay.
Okay.
And then you have go through an interview process, about a 20-minute interview. Usually 30 to 40 people do that. And then if you're successful, they pick 6 people
Wow.
to go to Tallahassee.
Only
So
6.
it's a second round of 6 people, and up there you're looking at the governor's council. The governor has many people that work with him. His general counsel, his lawyers, meet with you. They have 2 or 3 people up there that interview you up there with questions. So those 6 get re-interviewed on different, sometimes the same questions, but sometimes additional questions, okay, about judicial philosophy, things like that. And so those 6 people then will then get one of those people will get chosen from those 6 people. Now, certain governors, I've had the fortunate, I was selected by Governor Bush in 2001. Then I was selected to a higher spot by Governor Scott in 2011. Some governors will interview you yourself, the people, the 6 people as well.
So a face-to-face with the governor.
Sometimes that happens. Different governors do in different ways. And sometimes they'll even break that group of 6 down to 3 governors' interviews. There's just different things that happen, okay? Sometimes if the governor's in town and or his general counsel's in town, they will do that interview in Tampa, depending on the situation. So there's no real set way that works, except there is an additional round in Tallahassee.
Wow.
And then once that happens, they'll look at you and they'll decide if they're going to appoint you or not. And then, they'll say, well, don't give up, try again, and that sort of thing. So it's the appointment process, okay?
Okay.
The other process is the election process, where you run for positions that are open, or you run against incumbent judges. So there may be what's called an open seat. There were several open seats this last time, and there was qualifying. That was last Friday, the 24th of April. And then people would put their paperwork in and try to qualify for that position. And if they didn't receive opposition, they were elected without opposition for a new term. If you did receive opposition, you have to have an election, which is August the 18th of this year.
How long is the term?
6 years.
6 years, okay.
It used to be 4, and it moved up to 6.
Okay.
So, and of course, the difference in state judges and federal judges are federal judges do not have to run for election. Once they're appointed by the president, they're judges forever, right? But I mean state courts, the judges have to see the electorate every 6 years. Now, we got 2 other levels of our state judges, the DCA judges and the Supreme Court judges. They don't have elections. They have a preference, kind of a preference thing. They're on the ballot every 6 years, but the public votes to either retain them or not. It's like a retention poll.
Okay.
I would say preference earlier, it's a retention poll. So they have to face the electorate too, but it's a little bit different. Should you retain that person or not? We have to go through the election process. So it's election or appointment. Those are the 2 ways to do it. And I like that because it gives everyone an opportunity to do both, perhaps, right? Or, or if you're favorable in one position or the other, it gives you an opportunity to do that. I'm always for giving more people opportunity. I think that's really important because it makes a more diverse bench, right?
Right.
And it gives everyone an opportunity to show either the governor's people or the public, your qualifications and whether or not you should be a judge or not.
And this question may not be fair to ask you, but how does Florida fall compared to other states? Do you know in this judicial process?
Generally speaking, and again, this is a guess from my looking at it a while ago. I don't think there's as many states that have both processes. I think they have one or the other. But I think the state of Alabama elects their state Supreme Court justices, which is interesting. We don't.
Yes.
Ours are by appointment. There's no election for those. But and same with the DCA judges. But I think we're I don't want to say one of the few states, but there's not a lot that have both, from my memory.
Okay, because we'll have to talk about that more, and I want to invite you back on the podcast to talk about the death penalty, because there's a lot of interesting things.
There is. That's a constantly changing thing.
Yes, especially here
in our state.
Yes, especially in the state of Florida.
There's a lot to talk about.
Well, so you and I had a chance to talk to, and in fact, before I go into that subject, the reason why I asked you about the process of becoming a judge is because judges are held at a very high standard. Because really, I mean, I know we have juries, but the ultimate decision, correct, Judge? Or I mean, the judge is the one who has to make sure that there is a fair process,
Right.
and people do get their day in court.
That the jury, obviously, if it's a jury trial, they will make the decision on guilt or innocence, but the court controls the evidence and the way the case is produced to the jury. So if you had a judge that wasn't doing a good job with that, the jury may be hearing things they're not supposed to hear, which could affect their decision. So the jury makes the ultimate decision, but the judge has to make sure the case is running smooth, the laws are being followed, the evidence is being followed, the jury instructions are correct. So it's the jury's doing the ultimate decision, but the judge is channeling everything in a legal way so the defendant, the accused, has their due process rights and the victims are also protected. So it is a very important role. If not, if there was nobody in there kind of channeling and making sure everything was done legally, then the prosecutor and defense lawyer would just be talking to the jurors and there'd be no way to judge what was appropriate to go to them.
So that's experience and education
Right.
and just knowledge and
working through our system and knowing issues that come up in cases, because you're dealing with the attorneys, the witnesses, the accused, the victim, and jurors. So there's an awful lot going on in a case, and you're always focusing on, because one little thing said the wrong way, it's a mistrial, you do the whole thing again. So imagine if you just put on, I don't want to relate this like a play or something, but if you had everyone go through rehearsal, everything's for the big show, and then midway through the show, somebody falls and hurts themselves, the whole show is ruined, right?
Right.
And so once you bring everyone in, it's obviously really serious, a trial is, but it's kind of like that kind of idea that you want to make sure you do this one time, everything goes smooth, and everything is correct and legal. So it's a little nerve-wracking sometimes.
Judge, you have so much experience, and yeah, I can only imagine how nerve-wracking it is. Since you are in the criminal system, I'm sure you've presided over some very high-profile cases in Tampa, or you tell me.
I have, and I don't, because of the way I've been my appointments and the assignments I've gotten. It seems like that when I got up to do some of those. I've yet to do a death penalty case. We can talk about that for a second. I've yet to do that. Mm-hmm. I am qualified to do that. You have to go through a special schooling through the state of Florida, the Judicial College, to become qualified to hear a death penalty case. And
wow.
and so that's something that's been something I've been able to do. There haven't been a lot of death penalty cases in our jurisdiction, and a lot of that's due to the fact that the law is changing, and that can go down to our next podcast, but the law has been in limbo for a while in our state over the death penalty, and so it really hasn't been being used in the last several years. But I've handled all kinds of cases in the community, and it's just it's something that you just but every case is, everybody gets the same rights, whether you're not a high-profile case or that you are, and that's important to realize that. Sometimes the media is in there for the high-profile cases, and you've got to make sure that you don't change how you present yourself in the case, and they can't become a distraction. An interesting thing...
And I've been a member of that media many times
you know what's interesting, and I hear this from a lot of people, is that why are all the shows on TV from Florida, New York, and California?
Yes.
Why is that? We're the only 3 states that have a lot of crime. And the real reason is because many other states don't allow television and don't allow media. Those 3 states do. And because of that, and those are big states, California, New York, and Florida, right? That's why a lot of the shows are from there that you see. But it doesn't mean there's not crime in other states. It's just they don't allow the media in there.
Do you think media should be allowed in courtrooms? What is your opinion on that?
I think as long as it doesn't affect an accused right to a fair trial. That's really super important. I understand in Europe, there can't be a lot of pre-trial publicity right before the case gets started. So, there's the right of freedom of press, right, and for people to know. I just don't want it to affect an accused due process rights to a fair trial and or the victim's rights to a fair trial. So it's got to be a balance. It's got to kind of be a balance, to make sure that the press has their access to the case, but also that it doesn't affect the rights of individuals in a case. That's always a balance. And for example, when the media does come, we don't show the jurors' faces.
Right.
And sometimes there's only maybe 1 or 2 cameras in there.
It's called a pool camera sometimes.
Yeah.
So what just for the viewers to know, a lot of times what judges will say that they don't want so many cameras in there to be a distraction.
Right.
So the news stations, we have a pool system where we choose one photographer. We alternate, the channels alternate, and the one photographer shoots the video, then we all share the video. So it's a pool
Okay.
camera
All
for
right.
those people who may not know. But anyway, I'm
you
sorry,
just,
Judge.
You just have to be careful with, not get taken away that, and remember that you're a judge of a trial and the facts and the people that are there, and just kind of avoid that if you can. But make sure it's really important. The jurors, sometimes in high profile cases where there's some violent allegations, the jurors get concerned because they may be on television, and so that's why it's super, super important not to have them shown on television.
Right, to protect the jurors. And
Right.
in fact, years and years ago, I broke this story when I worked at the local station here about Kaylee Anthony, and that the jury was going to be chosen out of Pinellas County.
Right.
And I remember sitting there, and every single live truck from around the country showed up. And I remember my news director saying, "You're sure that the jury is going to be chosen out of Pinellas County? Your sources are good." And I'm like, but for the first time, I was like, "Oh my gosh!" But I just ask you that because I remember there was so much publicity around it, and there was a gag order
Right.
issued in that case.
Right.
So for a judge to issue a gag order, I have two questions about high-profile
All right.
cases like that. I mean, you've got to take all the information because the public wants to hear everything that they possibly can.
Right.
But then, as you mentioned, we've also got to protect the privacy. So what factors into that, Judge?
Well, yeah, besides being a judge, I'm also an instructor at some of the colleges here locally in the world of criminal justice, and we talk about what's called a change of venue.
Okay, yes, the change of venue.
Change of venue. And
that was like that case.
And in that case, I try and suggest to my students that we're living such a world of information now that we know what's going on around the world right now in any city, okay? So when in that particular case, the court had made a decision to get jurors from Pinellas and then bring them back to Orlando. And I'm not in any way being critical of that decision, but in the world that we live in now, information is everywhere. And people in California probably knew as much as people in Orlando knew about that case. So sometimes I don't really see a lot of change of venue things as much anymore because of all the information with the media and stuff, and everybody knows things. So sometimes it's important, like in federal court, there's no television. So you can't televise what's going on. So the gag order stops maybe some evidence of getting out to the public before the trial or getting to the jurors. So that's what it tries to do, to try to stop that from happening. But again, you have to balance the freedom of the press, that right, and to the defendant's accused rights, to the accused, their rights to have a fair and impartial jury and a fair trial. So it is interesting when that happens. But it just seems like more and more there's so much coverage everywhere.
Much.
I just don't see a lot of change of venue issues anymore in these what we call high profile cases because everyone kind of already knows. Here's the trick, I think. And this is a question that gets asked in the death penalty cases and a lot of the other high profile cases. Knowing what you know, can you still be fair? So in other words, to believe that people don't know in this day and age is really, in my mind, it's kind of difficult to think. Although there are some people, I've actually had some jurors that said, well, I don't know, I've never heard of this. And I guess it could happen.
But it's more rare
Yeah.
because the information is
It's just
everywhere. It's on our fingers.
So the question is, based on what you know, can you still be fair and impartial? So that's that question. So when the jurors come in, oftentimes the case that's coming up is advertised all over the media. Case starts on Monday, sensational trial starts on Monday, right? So everyone's maybe already seen it or read a little bit about it.
Definitely.
And that's going to happen on Monday morning. But when the jurors come into the courtroom, but based on what you know, have you already made a decision? Have you already formed a decision in your head? So that's what takes a little bit longer. So your jury selection process is going to take longer, probably in a more high-profile case.
So speaking of high-profile cases, I'll even go back to OJ.
Right.
In California, we've had several high-profile cases here. I know as a journalist, a lot of times you want to handle the big story, right? Or the story that is the most important story that's happening. Or for me, I've done many exclusive interviews. As a judge, do you want? I mean, how is a judge assigned one of these high profile cases, and do you want those high profile cases?
Well, you have to be qualified, first of all. If it's a death penalty case, that's the first thing. I don't know our number of our judges. I don't know how many are qualified because we all come in at different times. But that's one of the things they try once you get to the criminal assignment, that you go through this course and you get qualified as soon as possible if that's needed. We have some trial divisions that are able to do trials at weeks at a time. See, remember the other judges do their dockets, okay? And so you've got regular cases every day, and it's sometimes hard to fit a 2 or 3 week trial within your regular cases, right? So we have trial divisions in Hillsborough County. We actually have 3 of those, and that's all they do are the trials, and they're a little bit more lengthy trials. So those cases are going to, let's say we had a high profile case in Tampa, more than likely that will go one of those 3 that case will go to one of the 3 trial divisions, because it's a specialty court to handle cases like that. So the other judges could do it as well, but typically they're going to go there. So, and when that happens, you just have to understand that's ever consuming. That's your whole week or two. That's a high consumption type deal. There's a lot of issues with that. Jury selection takes an awful long time.
An awful long time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And you just have to make sure you get a fair jurors. And sometimes it's even tougher because the news is out there so much that people already know about the case.
Wow. So, we can't help it, right? Like we're all human.
Right.
Do you like proceeding over high profile trials?
The ones I do, but well, yes, it's not that I don't like it. It's just, and I really hate to be so blasé about it. It's just like anything else. It's not.
It's like another, for instance, I mean, I know a lot of people are talking about the Tiger King right now,
Right.
and about like maybe potential charges coming down the
Right.
line. Who knows? That's
Right.
what everybody is talking
Right.
about, right? The whole country is talking about
Right.
it. But and I'm not saying she's guilty. I'm not saying she's not guilty. I'm not saying, but just the talk around the country. What if Carol Baskins faces trial? Right? It would
Right.
fall in the jurisdiction of Hillsborough County.
I don't know. The one thing everyone is watching that show
Yes.
right now, and I would normally be with everyone else. I'm a huge animal person, biggest animal person you probably ever met, and my wife and I talked about are animals that get harmed in the show. And once we found out we did, well, we didn't even watch the show.
You couldn't even watch
and
it.
I feel bad because I heard it's a great show as far as entertainment value. No, I believe it's a federal case, so that case would come.
That's right. It is. It would be federal.
Is it a federal case?
You know what?
I don't know
it might be.
anything about it.
And I just honestly finished watching the show. The
Right.
only reason why I mentioned, I just used that example because
Right.
so many people are talking about
Right.
that right now.
Right, and so
And she's a high profile.
right, and it's on
person.
television and stuff. So that would be a heck of a jury selection if that ever comes here. One of the things you mentioned before about the OJ case, and I was a young prosecutor when that case, the verdict came out. I remember everyone was glued to the television. I think it was in '95. But one of the things that I always, as I told you, I teach that I want all my students to know is what not guilty means in America. Okay?
Okay.
Not guilty means innocent or not proven. Okay? So it's hard sometimes for people to understand that. They think guilty or innocent. You're innocent. But I always try as a judge when I'm talking to the jurors before the trial, and we have a chance to ask them some questions and present some things to them. I always tell them that in America, not guilty is 2 things, either or sometimes both. You're innocent. I didn't do this crime, right? Or it wasn't proven.
They couldn't prove it in court.
That I did this crime. And sometimes that's hard for people to understand when they sit as a juror, that that's what not guilty means in America. And so when we analyze all these cases, whether in the media or some other place, I always try when people, I can't believe that verdict happened. He's not innocent. But remember, there is that other aspect of that. And that's something I think is important for people to understand about our system of justice in America.
So, do you have an opinion on that case?
So, it's interesting. I just think that whole thing had so many issues to it. And I watch all the shows that are still about that now. I like watching that, especially 20, 25 years later. It's interesting. It's all I have to say. It's interesting. And it go back into guilty and not guilty and what all those 2 different things mean.
It truly is.
Sometimes people think maybe someone did something, but then if it wasn't proven they did it, they're not. It's the same not guilty as being innocent.
truly one of the most fascinating cases ever.
Well, it's a crime of the century. And I always talk to my students about what is their crime of their century. The Lindbergh baby kidnapping case was the crime of my parents' century in the 30s. And I guess OJ was mine. Maybe, I don't know if Casey Anthony, that's big enough to be theirs. I don't know. It's interesting.
It's interesting to look back on that. So Judge, have you always wanted to be a judge? When did you want to be a judge?
One of the things about being a public defender and prosecutor, a lot of people have a philosophy that's all they want to do in the criminal world, okay, as far as I can only be a prosecutor because, and that's fine, there's nothing wrong with having that feeling, or I can only be a defense lawyer because of that. I never really saw both of those roles as I can only just do that. I like doing the trials. I really enjoy the trial work. It's a different challenge. The public defender or the defense attorney is trying to destroy a case or break the case down, where the prosecutor is building the case up. So I like the challenge of just having trial work. One of the things I tell all my law students are, when you get out of school, if you do a trial before you go into a big firm, you're going to want to do trials forever. It gets in your blood. It's like it's a legal drug, adrenaline, and people like it. So if you're going to work in a big law firm, and which is fine, and not get into the courtroom right away, because normally it's hard to get into the courtroom right away if you go work for a big firm. That's still a great job. But once you get a trial under your belt, you'll get it in your blood, and you'll want to do that. So so a lot of people I talk to, I never could do defense work, or I never could do prosecution work. And that's fine, everyone to each his own, right? But I like both of those jobs, and it was a natural progression to go to the next job, which in my mind was the judge, having done both of those. And I really have a strong background in criminal law, so it was like a natural progression. Plus, there are a lot of people that are my mentors that I've worked under and worked with, and I've seen them go up to the bench. And that, like anything else, when sometimes you see your close friends do that, it inspires you as well to want to do that.
That's amazing. And so, Judge, I wanted to ask you, hasn't it been a relief that we haven't really talked about the coronavirus?
It is, and there's actually so much more of education on the public, on the judicial system. We could have hours of these shows just to educate people. And what's really super important. This isn't my words. What I heard someone tell me a few weeks ago. It's extremely important that we either appoint great judges or elect great judges, because you as a citizen are going to come into contact with a judge well before you come into contact with a politician, a governor. And again, I'm not saying,
right.
Don't vote for the governors,
right.
But your life is going to be more likely affected by a judge than someone else, okay,
Yes.
that you vote for in that ballot, or that gets appointed. So it is an extremely important position in our society. And sometimes I wonder if the public really knows who their judges are, knows their qualifications, knows their backgrounds, that maybe should have more of that, because those are the people. They're going to affect your life.
Absolutely.
And that's so important. And, a lot of times on a ballot, they're called down ballot choices, meaning the bottom of the
Right.
ballot. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't even go down that far to do that. And when they get down that far, they don't know, they haven't checked on those people. And I just always, when I get a chance, to emphasize how important it is, because those are the people that are going to tell you about getting divorced, taking your children,
Right.
sentence you to a crime, giving you a fine, whatever the situation is, whatever your interaction is with the court. And so that's why it's so important to do that. But yes, it is nice not to talk about that. But I do.
No, you bring up a very good point, though, about knowing who your judges are and really taking a harder look at their backgrounds.
Because they're going to affect you.
They're going to affect you.
Yeah, a lot sooner. Not that we don't want to know who our governor is or who these other people are. They're very important too. But who actually you're going to be touched by? Literally. I mean, not literally, but
Right.
who's going to affect your life? But it's good not to talk about that and get back to normal a little bit.
A little bit. So before we wrap this up, though, I do want to tell people that the judge did an amazing interview with us, though, on mission critical courtrooms, and that video is on my website. It's on YouTube. It's on SarinaFazan.media. It's on Sarina Fazan TV. You can find the video on Facebook, and we talk about what's happening with the courtrooms during this coronavirus crisis. But at the very end of the video, I did promise that I was going to ask one question. So this will be my last question before we wrap up the podcast. So many people are doing Zoom interviews, the courtroom, there's Zoom going on right now between the judges and the attorneys. And you said to me, Judge, that attire does matter.
It does, and we have one of our judges has a green screen set up, and he wants the background to be the courtroom. It's really a cool thing, and it's very innovative. And so he's in his robe. He's got the green screen in his garage, and it looks like a courtroom. So when you look at him, you see that projection, that professional projection. We had one of our judges, I read an article a few weeks ago in Broward County, who was making some comments to the local bar down there that he wanted everyone to look professional even while on television because you're still in court.
Right.
There was an article that he talked about some of the people coming in their sweatpants and jogging outfits and things like that appearing for the court hearing, and he wants it to be as real as possible. So that's something, because Zoom is so new and these other things are so new, that we really haven't talked about attire, okay? I, as I said earlier, teach school at law school and college, and so we had that issue right away with some of the students. I was educating them all across the country now because they've gone back home, and telling everybody, look, I don't expect you to wear a suit, but you can't be, waking up in bed in your pajamas doing class,
Right.
okay? And
Right.
so that's just at a college level, a law school level, right? And they got that real quick. But the professional level, I think, really says a lot. You to look good, you want to, you want to look good. You're going to do well. If you come to court in your sweatshirt, you won't be able to do that in real life. And we want to make this as real as possible. Under the circumstances. And I understand there's a lot of different circumstances, but we want the litigants to be dressed appropriately, and we want the attorneys to do that. Zoom attire, it's called, and it's something that I think it's a new word we're going to have in our lingo here, Zoom attire, but it's something that's going to, if we have to do this again, or maybe, as we talked about in our interview, after this is over, there may be more of this. So because of that reason too, we're going to have to make sure that people appear professionally, they're lawyers, and dressed appropriately, and
Attire does matter.
Yeah, there's no question about it, because it's a projection. It sets off something, and you don't want the judge to look at you in your sweatshirt on your couch hanging out.
And I completely agree with that. Like when I would walk into a newsroom, I would always be dressed not to go out on the streets and report, but if God forbid something happened, that I'm ready to go on the anchor desk, or ready at all times. And I think, and even if you're on Zoom, anything, the perception is very important in these cases.
And we didn't, and maybe next time we can talk about the Zoom environment, because what's interesting about that is we have several four-legged children in our home, and my wife's a teacher at high school here in Tampa, one of the local schools, so she's online at certain times herself teaching. And so, and I'm doing some of the Zoom, and then I've got the dogs barking. So not only Zoom attire important, but you have to make sure that your studio at home is locked down to where you're not going to have the phone ringing, the dogs barking, and all sorts of things. So you've got Zoom attire and Zoom environment.
Okay, absolutely. Some great points, Judge. Judge, I could talk to you for hours. Please come back.
Definitely
and
will.
visit us on the
enjoy
podcast.
it.
Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And in closing, paraphrasing one of my favorite poets, Ralph Waldo Emerson, go where there is no path and leave a trail. Thanks so much for listening to Trailblazer, everyone. I'm Sarina Fazan.